My name is Blinova, and I'm very happy to be here in person. It's been such a long time since I've really talked to real people and not to people online. So really happy to be here, but this also means that I'm a little bit rusty with presenting in person. So if there are any hiccups, sorry. Okay. A few words about me and something that I would like you to keep in mind during my presentation on the Synchronous Speaking Club is that I work with people one-to-one. I work with adults only these days, and most of them are either learning English for general purposes or business English. But I do have experience teaching other kinds of courses, and I used to work with teenagers, I think like for 5-7 years. I'm also a big enthusiast of using psychology in language teaching and language learning, and technology too. So that's my take on what we can do to help our students improve their speaking. So I'm going to start with context and how the idea of an asynchronous speaking club was born. Then we're going to take a look at the preparation stages, talk about the mechanics, so I'll explain how it works. We'll talk about issues and the outcomes, and hopefully we'll have some time for a Q&A. So let's start. I want to transport you back in time to March and April 2020, when Moscow was in lockdown, and that's what the center of Moscow looked like. At that time, I think that we all just went online and started communicating not only with colleagues, but friends and family. I could see it with my students, and I could see my friends and family doing the same. But the more we kind of got used to doing that, the more I understood that instead of Zooming all the time and doing video conferencing, people started getting into their routines, their work routines too. So they had less time for this kind of synchronous communication. And they switched to using messengers and messaging apps instead. But to keep this kind of personal touch, we were using voice messaging instead of just texts. So this is what happened. These were the trends that I noticed. I think it was like late May, the beginning of summer. And looking at these trends, I understood that they look very interesting, and I could actually use them to do something for my students. I had been entertaining the idea of a synchronous speaking club for a long time, but as I work with students one-to-one, it was very hard to find the time and the place which was suitable for everybody. That's why I decided that these are just what we need, and let's build on them. Build from what? At that time, I was teaching two groups of students, I would say, business English and general English students, all of them one-to-one. You can see that their levels were quite different, and the age groups too, but they had things in common. First, they were all interested in improving their speaking, which is, I think, not surprising, because if you ask students, what would you like to do more of? What do they say? Absolutely, most of the time, for once. And then as for speaking with my business English students, usually they were quite good at discussing their business topics, but they were struggling with small talk. And small talk was really important for them because this is a way of establishing relationships and actually doing business. So I decided that we can talk about general English topics and how everybody was using WhatsApp. All my students, both to communicate with me, so I knew for sure that they could do that, and to get in touch with their family, I suppose, too. So keeping in mind that I work with students one-to-one, how many students do you think I had at that time? Any other ideas? Thank you very much. I can't really teach 30 students at the same time. There is only one of me. 10 participants. This is an important number. On the one hand, it can look like, too few students for a club. On the other hand, maybe it's too big. Just keep it in mind, because when we will talk about outcomes, you will see why it's important. Okay, so what I assumed about all this business was that we should be doing it definitely asynchronously. People were just too busy to find time for another Zoom meeting during the week for sure. We'll focus on speaking and we'll choose general English topics. It will work. I was a little bit worried about my lower level students because I had like a 1+ student. So how level appropriate would it be for her? So when coming up with the content for the club, I always included questions which can be answered by lower level students. Worked pretty well. And of course, they were all enough tech savvy to deal with WhatsApp and understand how to record messages, how to reply to messages, and so on. So I expected enthusiastic participation, of course, because I was building on the trends, wasn't I? And also it was asynchronous, so you can do it anytime and any place. Also, I thought that students would be more interested in talking to each other, not me, because they got enough of me during class. Believe me, I love speaking. And I also hope that it wouldn't be too time consuming, again, keeping in mind that they were spending a lot of time in front of screens for work or for studying, whatnot. So my assumption was 10-15 minutes per week. So that was kind of a hypothesis that I had, that this asynchronous speaking club would be beneficial for my students, both psychologically and linguistically, and that they would participate enthusiastically. So let's vote. Who believes that I was right? Nobody? Wow, you're a tough audience, really. Well, I'll tell you if I was right or not. So the preparation part. I started with dealing with these 3 points. First, I had to introduce this idea, to sell this idea to my students. Then I had to establish some rules, a code of conduct, if you wish, and of course, to find content appropriate for discussions. I started with a personal touch. I contacted each of my students directly by sending them a message like this on WhatsApp, actually. I chose to use L1 because I wanted my goals very, very clear. What I did was to highlight not only their language benefits, but also the psychological benefits, so they could communicate with people, interesting people, discuss interesting things with them. I was very clear on where, when, and how it's going to be happening, and I think that was the key. And of course, I was sure that they would have questions because it was a completely new format for them. So I invited them to ask me about it, which they did in class, or they replied to my message on WhatsApp, so we could clear any ground we needed. And of course, I set the starting date. And that was very important because I think it really encouraged students to decide very fast whether they wanted to take part in it or not. Then I sent them the set of rules they were supposed to be following. Remember, that was supposed to be a speaking club. So my idea was to make sure that they would know that there was no texting allowed. The idea was to communicate using voice messages. So I included it in the set of rules, again, using L1 just to make sure that everything was 100% clear. I wanted them to speak English only. It's again in the rules to make sure that they knew that. And my idea was that they should be talking to each other, not to me. I didn't want them to record messages and then forget about them, or kind of create long monologues. No. So that's why I included in the set of rules that they had to listen to other participants, other clubbers, and to comment on them, record voice messages in reply. I thought that if we're talking about rules, establishing respect is very important. Actually, my idea was to create a community of learners. That's why I invited everybody to address each other using their names and to treat each other with respect and kindness. One more thing, I'm always thinking about conflicts and conflict situations potentially. And I believe that if you're creating something like this, when people can't really see each other, you should have some rules for conflict resolution. I decided that I would be the final judge of who is at fault. And that's why in the rules it says that it's up to me to resolve any kind of conflict. The clubbers were welcome to contact me if they needed me. And of course, content. Well, I think that that was actually maybe the easiest part because there are so many resources for speaking clubs out there. There are special books. You can even use textbooks, up to you. There are online resources, and I think that on the last slide of my presentation, there are a few links to the websites that I really like. But I would actually encourage you, if you choose to do something like this, is to consider yourself as a resource. Because ultimately, asking yourself this question, what would you ask a friend, for me, produce the most successful discussion topics. You can see that in the corner there is parsnips. Does anybody know what it stands for? Okay. Absolutely, you can't really yeah, you can't really find them in published materials most of the time. So politics, right? What is A? A. Alcohol. Religion, then absolutely sex. Narcotics, drugs. I. Fascism, Nazism, and all other isms. No, they're called isms. Can be veganism, so things too. What is P? Yes, pork. And I think that's all. Am I right? Yeah. I would also include health in this list of topics, just from personal experience. That not the best one. Anyway, these are also the topics that usually are not touched upon in small talk. Remember, I was teaching business English students, and small talk was kind of what I was wanted them to work with in the club. So, how it all worked. Every Monday, I greeted my students with a recap of the previous week. So I let them know that they did a good job, even if they didn't. It was all about motivation and encouragement. I touched upon some highlights, maybe some interesting ideas or shared experience, and then I signposted the new week. I think it's really very important to, it was very important for me to make sure that they understood that the new week was starting and we were talking about a different topic. So using a photo, the name of the week, really helped that, because when you're scrolling through the WhatsApp chat, you could see a photo, something different from what they usually saw. I tried to introduce the topic in a personal way. So I was usually typing something like, you know, last week I heard that, my friends and I were talking about this, and so on. And I also reminded them that they were supposed to choose a couple of questions to talk about, and that they should listen to other participants and comment on what they had to say. Sometimes I shared some extra resources. For instance, when we were talking about St. Patrick's Day, I was sure that some of my students didn't really know much about it. So they had some videos to watch or things to read if they wanted to. So that was not obligatory. During the week, I behaved, well, I used kind of three strategies. Either I got involved, especially when I could see my students struggling with starting. I think one of the weeks we had kind of a storytelling topic, so I just shared my story on that topic with them, invited them to reply to me, and it worked wonderfully. So they had a model and they became more confident and more willing to participate. I sent students private reminders that there were new questions for discussion in the WhatsApp club, because they were all busy professionals, and I was like, okay, it's not a problem for me to send you a message. And it really worked. After this, they participated and they were always very thankful for the reminder. Sometimes I just left it. Some topics didn't work, and I was okay with that. Sometimes the discussions were so involved that they didn't need me at all, so I stayed away. What went wrong? Lots of things could go wrong, and some of them did. So first, participation, as I have already told you, right? I expected enthusiastic participation. You voted nay for that. Well, most of the time, they were really enthusiastic, so enthusiastic that they started sharing different resources and links with each other. So then I just kept away and enjoyed the discussions from a distance. But sometimes, yes, I had to get involved really into it and carry the week on my shoulders. Some topics did not work. And here I'm inviting you to guess which topic was the worst topic to introduce for a speaking club last year. Absolutely. Here I was thinking, oh my goodness, you need all this vocabulary. Come on, guys, let's practice. No, nobody wanted to talk about this. In my experience, the simpler the better. People love talking about themselves, their childhood, their family, hobbies, shopping, being constantly online worked better than COVID-19 and so on. So keep it simple, especially if we are talking about a genuine English speaking club or practicing small talk. Don't overcomplicate. And well, as for rule breaking, thankfully, all my students read their rules carefully and kept them in mind. So there weren't a lot of instances of rule breaking. Sometimes they forgot to comment on other participants' contributions. I was okay with that, just reminded them, you know, here are the rules. Please take another look. And I think it was only once when the message got sent late. Well, things happen. It was okay. So, did it work? That was my assumption, right? You already know that the participation was not as enthusiastic as I hoped. But what about the benefits? Were there any? Let me tell you that the results were amazing, because the fluency of the students improved drastically. They noticed that without me prompting them to think about that. What is more, we really could implement all these strategies, which are very hard to practice if we're talking about one-to-one classes. So turn taking, communication breakdowns, all those things which they needed but couldn't practice that much with me. I have already told you that sometimes they really got involved. So that was real communication for them. As for psychological benefits, I managed to create a community. I was amazed, actually, because I think that was a hard job to do. And they really supported each other. All the other participants supported my A1 plus student, encouraged her, and it was like amazing, unbelievable, great for use. And it was a motivation boost. And it was a motivation boost not only for my students, but also for me, because I listened to their recordings and I was amazed at how fluent and proficient they could be in real communication. I was like, my goodness, you can really do that.
Сегодня ничего не задала, потому что вы сегодня в библиотеку пошли. Она сказала, там что-то принести надо на труды.
Was it worth it? Absolutely. So if you choose to do something like this, I think that you should keep in mind your students, their needs. Don't overcomplicate it. And it shouldn't really take a lot of time because there are a lot of resources that you can use for content. Okay. Oh, the club is alive. We're still clubbing, we're still speaking. So it usually takes, I think, 10, 15 minutes per week for me to keep it up. So, no. Okay. If you have any other questions, I will be happy to answer them. Yeah.
Okay, right, I'll start all over. So it's not a question, it's more a suggestion, because during pandemic, there are a lot of speaking clubs like this online, and you can find links on Facebook. I think there are some on my page because my students joined them when the pandemic started. And the interesting thing about them is that they're not only for Russian students, and I think it's very motivating because students understand they cannot resort to Russian because people don't understand. And it's kind of a universal community nowadays. And one of the platforms which I use with my school students is iDialogue. It's completely free. So you can just register there, students can register there, and they can easily participate in such discussions. They can record themselves, they can message. And interesting thing is that it's much easier for a teacher because you don't have to moderate it. It's already there, there are news, and there are different parts of news, and they are according to the level. So the student visits and clicks like, okay, intermediate to upper intermediate group. Okay, what's on the news? Who would like to discuss it? I would like to discuss this topic. And they just jump in and discuss it. And now online on Facebook, you can find a lot of groups of teachers all around the world. Actually, you usually Google like Delta teachers or CELTA teachers, and you completed CELTA, you know, there is a big CELTA community. And there is the same big Delta community of teachers who try to improve speaking of their students. And they do it like as international group of students. And they have different projects for those who like online communication. For my students, apparently not for adults, but for teens, we had a great project of snail mail during pandemic because we all got tired of Zooming, of texting and everything. So we had mail exchange with students from Germany, Poland, UK, and we sent the real mail. I mean, it took time, it took some money, but we had such an excitement of students getting a letter and, you know, reading it at school and then writing another letter. Apparently it was not that much speaking, but it was good communication and they practiced a lot. So maybe you would like to implement that in your teaching as well.
Thank you for the contribution, but I do have something to say to that. I'm like aware that what I'm doing is not brand new. But my idea was to create a safe environment. I wanted to moderate it, to make sure that my students felt comfortable, because what you're talking about is ready-made and available, absolutely. And the most motivated students don't need me, they can do that on their own, right? But I had students who were much less motivated, and this allowed me to make them speak and speak more and speak better.
I mean, if it works for your students, that's the most important thing about it. I was just thinking that maybe somebody would consider it, maybe not you, maybe somebody of participants, maybe somebody of our Zoom participants, because it's a really good idea. And I think from my experience, a lot of students want to talk to people who learn language, maybe from other cultures, because they can share a lot of life experience, they can learn a lot. And there are actually groups where there are native speakers who would like to participate. Apparently, they're not learning language, they are sharing this knowledge, which is, I think, a lot of people would like to speak to natives. Why?
Yeah, why?
Why not?
Most of my students do not speak to native speakers. They communicate in English as lingua franca.
But don't you think they lose on that?
Сейчас сделаю, я уйду отсюда, мне отправить надо сообщение.
Don't you think they lose from this communication, which is with Russian English. Like when you speak with native speakers, you acquire a lot of features of speech which you do not acquire from the same speaker of your own language. That is the pleasure of multi-language groups.
I always consider my students' goals. My students do not do business with the UK and the US and Australia. They do business with Germany, Poland, Slovenia, things like that. So these are the language. This is the language they need.
Okay. It was just a suggestion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I take it your students were at different levels of English. Did it create any problems? If yes, how did you deal with them?
Well, my main concern was that the questions that I was offering were too complicated for the lower level students. So I included something, let's say, easier for them. But ultimately, what my lower level students told me was that it required more preparation time for them. But as for the communication itself, there was maybe only one instance of communication breakdown. So when the lower student was not understood at all by the other clubbers, well, in the end, they didn't need me. They figured out. So they asked extra questions. One of the clubbers contacted me and I just advised, if you are not sure what they mean, ask them. Why are you asking me? So give them some learning autonomy here. Mine managed.
So stronger students didn't mind talking to someone who they might thought being inferior to them. Was okay.
Absolutely not, because even in my classroom, I try to create an atmosphere of, acceptance, I suppose. Again, if they are using English as lingua franca, some of the speakers might not have the same level they do, so they have to be able to communicate with people who have lower level of English. And that was kind of the idea that I was supporting. So I was telling them, you can benefit from such situations. And in the end, they agreed, because actually the speaking club was a part of an action research. So I conducted surveys and got feedback from the students to prove what I'm telling you.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a question. Well, was it an additional practice of English for your students, WhatsApp communication, or did you have real lessons of English during that time?
Oh,
I mean, WhatsApp communicating, was it the only English practice for your students, or did you have some other English lessons with your students?
Yeah, I got it. All those people were my students. So they were having classes regularly at that time. Some of them work in international environments, so they had some kind of practice outside the classroom too. Some were even, they found themselves having more free time, so they took advantage of the kind of platforms that Tatiana, Anna talked about. So
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
And we have one more question from the chat. Have you tried Asynchronous speaking club? If yes, did it work better or worse than the Asynchronous one? Synchronous versus asynchronous. Have you tried synchronous speaking clubs?
Have I tried? With my students, okay, not personally. Well, the problem for me, and I have already said that, is finding the time that can be suitable for everybody, because I'm doing one-to-one classes. So far, no. And out of my 10 students, only one was really, really, I don't know how to put it. She really wanted us to have a synchronous meeting, but everybody else was like, no, I don't want to spend more time in front of the screen. So this can be understandable. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the questions.